And welcome back to the CIB Presidential Seminar Series that we broadcast from Purdue University. And as you all know, this session, we are doing panel discussions leading towards the CIB World Building Congress that Purdue University is going to host from May 19th through the 23rd. So all the topics for the panel discussion are centered around the Sustainable Development Goals and the role of the built environment in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. So within that, we have different topics and different panels. And again, today, we have two very distinguished colleagues here to talk about implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in smart cities. And let me go through just quickly through their bio, and then I'll hand it over to them to get the discussion started. So we have Professor Jeremy Gibbard. He comes to us from CSIR in South Africa. He's also the session lead for Smart and Sustainable Built Environments. That's the Working Commission 116 of CIB. Professor Gibbard's work explores how smarter, more sustainable, and inclusive built environments can be developed. He has carried out a wide range of policy research, training, guidelines, development, and the built environment projects for UNEP, ILO, UNICEF, UN Habitat, GEF, the EU, the World Bank, the Royal Academy of Engineering, and so on. And including governments of Armenia and, of course, South Africa, Zambia, Sierra Leone, as well as for communities and the private sector. Professor Gibbard coordinates the CIB Working Group 116, as I mentioned, which is on smart and sustainable built environments, also known as SASB, SASBE, and is a board member of the Globe Consensus. He's on the editorial boards of the Smart and Sustainable Built Environments, Building Research and Information, and ACTA Structula journals. Dr. Gibbard is a professor at the University of Witwatersrand. He's a chief researcher at the CSIR and is a principal at Gage. Our second panelist, Professor Morten Bjerre, comes to us from Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway. He is the coordinator for W101, which is Spatial Planning and Infrastructure Development. Morten is an architect and urban designer. His research interests are in the way places change through often uncoordinated activities by property owners, residents, business owners, and municipalities. He looks for ways that these can be coordinated to enhance people's experience and use of urban areas. So with that brief, quick introduction, let's welcome our panel. And with that said, let me hand it over to Professor Gibbard. Jeremy, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm just going to share my screen and just check that you can see that now. Paul, can you confirm that you can see the screen?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. And what I'm going to cover is perhaps a slightly different approach, because I think what I'd like to do is complement really what Morten is going to cover later. So perhaps more global, perhaps a little bit more emphasis on developing countries. Okay. So first of all, just looking at the SDGs, again, many of you will be very familiar with the SDGs. So I'm not going to go into the detail, but what is interesting really about the SDGs is just how widespread they are. The goals that have been signed up by most countries. And so they're a very useful universal set of objectives that we can look at in the built environment. And the one that most of us look at is SDG 11. And if you dig deep into the actual goals, they're very specific targets that are linked to particular objectives. So there's a lot of detail that you can look at if you're interested in thinking about how built environments can be guided and framed and structured to support the SDGs. So this slide shows the SDGs in terms of 1 to 17 on the left, and then all of the different built environment objectives. And the interesting thing really, if you go through this exercise, is how many implications there are. So within the SDGs, there's these sets of different goals, and they're very clear implications. And again, that's something that's useful to look at and look at the detail. So moving from what are the SDGs and thinking about what are smart cities and how do we think about the SDGs in smart cities, we can really break down smart cities and sustainability in terms of a number of very clear aspects. So it's about data, it's about connections, it's about citizen participation, technology, innovation, sustainability, and resilience. And one of the things that is also important in terms of the data sharing is how we increasingly have access to very good data. So we can use Internet of Things, linked to cell phones, sensors within cities to be able to access very good data. And that becomes available to anybody to use and to inform planning and inform cities. We have very accessible technology now where we can put Internet of Things type loggers, type sensors around our cities, around buildings. They can measure pollution, they can measure temperatures, they can measure population density, movement of vehicles, etc. And this data can be then sent through to portals and accessed very easily through a range of different devices. So the typical one would be something like a cell phone. And this incredibly rich data becomes available for improving the performance of cities and thinking through how we manage and design cities related to the SDGs. And so there's a whole very rapidly developing area around citizen science in terms of getting people involved in their cities and understanding the cities and driving change for the better, because they can access data real time from cities. The next example I'm going to show is related to COVID. And I think COVID was a very useful event when it comes to thinking about data. And this particular example shows how data was tracked globally. So in the first set of examples, we look at power, and we can see that European countries, India, US, states, we could see how there's a marked decrease in the consumption of power. Industry, even more marked, 40% reductions in places like China, US steel, city congestion, huge reductions in traffic and congestion, mobility, travel, transport around countries. The UK dropped almost 60%, US states 40%. Residential went up. A lot of people stayed at home, they worked from home, so you'd expect more activity at home. But lastly, a huge drop in aviation. So we have this data, we can access it and we can break it down per area, and we can start thinking about what are the implications for this. And some of the implications are very interesting. So this shows what the situation was like in terms of pollution in China, in this region of China around Wuhan in January 2020. And then very soon afterwards, only about a month later, we have, as COVID took effect, a lot of industries closed down, a huge drop in pollution, and you have a very marked change in atmosphere and pollution. And we can pick that data up and we can track how quickly we can change our environment through changes in activity. And we can then take a lot of this data globally and look at what this means. So one of the major reasons for people not driving climate change and climate mitigation is this argument that it's too late, we can't make a sufficient change. And what this data says is it says very clearly that it is possible. So this first graph shows global daily fossil carbon dioxide emissions in terms of million of tons. And it showed, as a result of COVID, about a 20% drop. So a huge drop in carbon emissions in a very short space of time, in literally a couple of months. And I think it's worth remembering this, it's worth driving this home and using this data to back up arguments that change is possible. And if you're concerted, you're coordinated, there can be a huge change in the carbon emissions that are achieved. And so again, if we take this back to the SDGs, there's an SDG around carbon emissions, and this shows in a very evidence-based way how you can reduce carbon emissions very quickly, and there's the evidence behind it to support that argument. Another aspect in terms of data, increasingly we have very good data available online in terms of maps. This particular one is from Google, and it shows sunshine. So it shows solar potential of rooftops, and pretty much anywhere globally you can now type in postcode, and it'll then give you the capability in terms of power that you can generate off your roof. So we've got very powerful access to very good data. This particular example is one that we developed to look at rainwater harvesting in informal settlements. And we wrote a very simple script, and you can run that through Google Maps, and it then generates all the roof areas, and you can then link that to rainfall to get quite a sophisticated model for rainwater harvesting in an informal area. So again, very powerful data to drive access to water, to drive access to renewable energy. This particular example is a readily available database. You can type in, again, any address. And what it then shows is it shows for a particular point how accessible different functions are. So schools, workplaces, retail, etc. And so you can, again, use this type of database to readily access the accessibility of neighborhoods and improve that over time. So in your planning, improve access to education, improve access to health facilities very quickly and easily using free, publicly available databases. But one of the things that you need is the kind of coordination of a lot of these ideas. So we've talked about SDGs, and there are 17 of them. How do you take that very high level set of goals and filter that through into what happens on the ground? And it's useful to think about some of these smart technology models where we think about the cognitive, the high level goals, the kind of virtual aspects, the organizational aspects, and then physically how that comes through in your physical environments. And so what I did in this particular model is take a lot of the same sets of ideas and say, okay, if you've got the SDGs as your driving framework, you can also have obviously local city goals, you can have national development plan goals, etc. But you set those up at a high level, and then you filter them through very clear evidence-based planning processes. You make sure you've got the right technology, the right business models, and that then is reinforced and comes through in your sustainable built environments, your regenerative natural systems, and data. You use that data back and forth to get information and performance at ground level back into planning systems, and you make sure at your organizational levels that you have, highly effective systems that are refined and developed really to drive the achievement of sustainable development goals over time. And we've explored this with the city of Joburg. We developed a planning approach that used data from neighborhoods, so quite detailed neighborhood data in terms of environmental issues, social sustainability issues, economic issues, really to kind of build a loop in terms of the planning so that you build the capability in a neighborhood to access things like education, to access health facilities, better parks, biodiversity, etc., and then track the performance afterwards. So you can then track a whole set of statistics in terms of social performance, health performance, etc. So you build very clear processes that link into integrated development plans, spatial development frameworks at a city level and also at a neighborhood level. At a neighborhood level, one of the projects that we developed is around a tool called the Built Environment Sustainability Tool. And the way this worked is that you can measure the capability in terms of sustainability for a particular identified neighborhood. And what you can then do is you can propose a set of different interventions. So things like residential densification, education hubs, food markets, recycling, and renewable energy microgrid, etc. And you can test those different options out in the model, really to identify the ideal set of interventions that will bring you to full capability, so full infrastructure that will enable this community to live and work sustainably. So it's a very useful process, really, to make sure that there's strong participation and involvement. You assess what's there, you test different ideas, you then develop a plan, you agree it with your local municipality. Some of it's funded by local government, some of it can be funded by communities, and some of it can just be organizational aspects in terms of things like recycling, etc. So you make the systems work at a neighborhood level. One of the key problems in many developing countries, but also in developed countries, is where is the money that is going to create this transformation? How do we change our inefficient built environments to something that works much more efficiently? And one of the things that I would propose is that we need to look much more carefully at technology. We need to look at new business models. And the idea of product as a service is coming through very strongly as a very promising approach. And the idea of a product as a service is that an entrepreneur will offer a service. So they'll offer a renewable energy service, or hot water service, or a gray water service. And they will install the system on your building at their cost. They'll maintain it, and they will just charge you for the usage of that system. And the advantage of this is that A, you've got no capital, so government doesn't have to have any capital, building owners don't have any capital, and B, you can install these systems very quickly at the cost of the entrepreneur. And for the entrepreneur, it's very useful because they've got a whole set of these installations that they can maintain very efficiently, and they've got a very good continuous income stream. So it's a very nice model to look at in terms of creating change very rapidly in different areas. So areas around water, for instance, energy, but there are many others that can be looked at as well. And what we've explored is really how this could be expanded and kind of embedded into built environments. So one of the types of environment we have in South Africa and many developing countries are these informal settlements, which actually have this amazing network of services and products that are provided locally. So this map at the bottom with all of these red and white dots show an amazing mixture of different services, that from hairdressing to food to mechanics, etc., within this very small area. And there's this amazing network that enable people to live there very cheaply, but also access this wide range of services. So one of the things we've done is really kind of look at, instead of this very centralized system in cities where we have a municipal waste system, a municipal energy system, municipal water systems, and kind of large commercial food systems, how do you break that down and create a whole range of local services and local entrepreneurs, and then link them up so you've got very efficient systems, so that waste from one system, for instance, a food system can be composted and then can be used for urban agriculture. And so you've got these urban systems that are very efficient and very linked, and you can build that into buildings as well. So you have the same product as a service approach, where you have renewable energy systems, hot water systems, grey water systems, rainwater harvesting systems, and these then are provided to apartments, to small businesses for a fee. And so you've got this, again, this ecosystem of entrepreneurs providing sustainable systems very efficiently within an area. So I'm moving on to really the last example. So the last aspect that I talked about was sustainability and resilience, and how smart cities can embed sustainability and resilience into neighborhoods, into urban areas. And this particular study we've just finished. And what it looks at is it takes an urban area of South Africa, and it says, if we carry on our existing development paths, what are the impacts? And then it says, if we choose a circular option, different, much more sustainable option, what would be the implications? And what we did was model a number of interventions and look at the implications. So one of the first ones was to say, if you followed more 15-minute city models, principles in terms of neighborhoods, what are the implications? And what we found was that you would get many more households, many more people able to walk to work, children to walk to school, health facilities, and the calculation shows about 100,000 additional households would be able to access that. So they wouldn't need to go and access public transport with all the associated costs, etc. Another aspect was looking at the deconstruction of buildings and the reuse of building materials. We can model that, and what the modeling showed was about 220,000 tons, about a 44% reduction in waste that went to landfill. The last sets of examples are around food, so integrating urban agriculture within leftover areas around human settlements in Joburg enabled very large amounts of vegetables to be grown, about sufficient for about 3.4 million people that are projected in 2040. So very significant numbers and proportions of vegetables could be grown locally. And again, huge advantages in terms of water, in terms of food security, etc. The similar examples, when we looked at rainwater harvesting, modeling enabled very large reductions in consumption of water, because it will be harvested off roofs and then used to flush toilets or used for irrigation instead of water being pumped from Lesotho, another country. And it's a very water scarce area. So there's, again, many advantages. The last one is composting, again, linked to urban agriculture. Instead of all of that organic waste being diverted to landfill, you would have neighborhoods composting the organic matter, providing fertility to urban agriculture, and creating a lot of jobs. So one of the key things in developing countries is the creation of good jobs, sustainable green jobs in cities. You can access the guide. So it's the report of the study. And I can give some links at the end if anyone's interested. So I think that is my last slide. These are some of the references of the studies that the presentation is based on. I normally do a little blog article with the links. So you're welcome to find those if you're interested. And I look forward to some questions a little bit later. Thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Professor Gibbard.
Mark?
That was very nice. I think you raised a lot of good and very important points, particularly related to, do SDGs only need to be implemented on smart cities, or could they be implemented on current cities as well? And I have a number of questions that I'm sure are going to come up. So let's wait till the end for those. But with that said, let me hand it over to Professor Yere. Martin, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Can I replace current? Yeah, there we go. There.
I've stopped sharing, so you should be able to. Morten, you should be able. There we go.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. There we go. I think you can see the title slide now.
Yes.
Perfect. Hey, really interesting presentation, Jeremy, and we haven't coordinated, but I think we will be coordinated. I can probably go through a couple of my slides relatively quickly as a result. I suppose the Working Commission 101 and the work I'm interested in is really about how to set frameworks for transformation. Spatial planning has long horizons and necessarily has to coordinate the efforts of a number of often disconnected and disinterested parties. Municipalities can, in the Norwegian context and every place I've worked, the municipalities have the role of coordinating such development, but they can only go so far in changing the publicly owned land. And it's how that privately owned land alongside it, that frames it, that activates it, how that is developed is often a more interesting question and set of problems to solve. And that process involves interpreting images or information such as we see on the screen here. How that process is how the opportunities are recognized by the landowners, how the local authority manages and encourages good behavior on the part of landowners toward the goals that they've set in their spatial planning efforts. And of course, today we see the Sustainable Development Goals directly referred to in the spatial planning as goals associated with the spatial plan for an area. And at times you have projects like this that come up as pleasant surprises, where the property owner has recognized the value of opening up a portion of their building to welcome people through in a redevelopment project. The municipality has in turn recognized that with that move and having given away some of the lettable area, that it may be appropriate to allow a little more development in other areas. But such win-win situations are based on nuanced understanding of the opportunities, as well as challenges, as well as precedents. When you have these happy results, gives great optimism about the way in which spatial planning can move toward the sustainable development goals. And I guess here, more than a hard science, sustainable, measurable sustainability, this is really about social and perhaps economic sustainability through making the area around the project more attractive to spend time in and walk through. But sustainable or spatial planning is also taking smart technologies into account. There's been quite a lot of development of the digital twin. And on the screen here, we see the emerging digital twin of Manchester, a private organization, private enterprise that is developing this digital twin and leasing it back to both developers and to the local authorities as a tool for their ongoing development, particularly around evaluating proposals for new development. Smart technologies are also affecting, and Jeremy touched on this, I think all of us have got experience of using smart technologies in the way we move around the places we live in, places we visit, and they give improved access to those services. It's an example here of urban facility management. We understand a lot about facility management at a building scale, and we're now able to move with these technologies that connect us with real-time sensing, with different systems, infrastructure systems that can be sensed and assessed. We're seeing the ability to manage urban places in the same way as built facilities. A little example of how digital technologies are being taken into use to solve specific problems is one here in Valencia in Spain, where the local authority had a conundrum with a city center that is more than 2,000 years old and very attractive to both live in, to visit, and to spend time in. And as people spend time, the need for goods and materials to also be available for consumption. But these deliveries and the spaces they move through were unconducive. Arkeha, who's working then on behalf of their client, assessed the needs of the business owners, the residents, anyone who had a supply issue in that central area, used their digital twin to record, analyze, and then through the repetitive process of analysis to optimize solutions. All of this was in the context of an idea that breaking down the deliveries into smaller loads that could be distributed throughout the day in more compatible services such as this resulted in a network of depots, service depots that could be utilized to service the central city. A win-win, and Jeremy touched on business opportunities. Here's a new business opportunity for the last mile delivery that also enhances the way in which the spaces can be used. This is the use of energy and some of the frustrations that have been set up or that arise through the way energy has been distributed in Norway, as well as many other places that protect the the owners of the infrastructure and the service providers, despite the technologies being available to share between neighbors. That has been one area of interest for the ZEN, Zero Energy Neighborhoods Research Center by SINTEF, or set up by SINTEF. And the goal here is to lead to sustainable neighborhoods that have zero greenhouse gas emissions. The tools they've been using are to monitor and share energy. Jeremy touched on the way roofs can be utilized for solar panels. Even here in Norway, we can generate energy on the roof, but we also have amazing resources in water and groundwater or ground temperatures. But these new business models that are developing around the ability to generate, to share, and monitor energy are significant. An example of this is at a large development where a perfect storm, so to speak, where the local authority set ambitious goals and was able to advocate for development that was both reduced in energy use, was based around a sharing platform, was able to be monitored, and could be monitored through its life, is arising. And this is leading to useful information that can help stimulate other similar type developments in other places, not simply in the Norwegian context. But with all the technology to utilize and the growing availability of smart technologies, we also want to remember that cities are for people and nature. And that's not to say that the smart technologies are instead of, but often when we look at hard numbers, it's hard to visualize or hard to give space for the nuanced experiences and nuanced needs that people and nature have in these change processes. And so I really want to bring people back into the sustainable consideration here, in addition to, not instead of the smart technologies. It's also a chance to introduce all of us, reintroduce us to some of the interests of the Working Commission 101. In 2014, and I think, Jeremy, you were a part of this project, we looked at how cities could be made accessible to all. Different cases from around the world were published in this document. Accessibility to all this, irrespective of their economic circumstances, their ethnic or social backgrounds, and also focused on the need for these places that were accessible to be attractive, and that they could become useful meeting places, social meeting places. The focus was on the quality of the public realm in the chapters of this publication, and also for looking at the local as ways of developing those solutions that could be attractive and sustainable for people to spend time in. I guess that also leads into one of the research projects that I want to talk about, which is underway here in Trondheim, the Enact 15-Minute Cities project. It's a consortium of research teams in 4 countries, each of us looking at walkability and how to transform environments, in our case, like this street that's probably not unfamiliar to any of you listening, that's really based around motorized traffic, how it can become transformed into a more attractive place to spend time in. Part of it is the scale of the environment. Part of it is the range of activities along the way. The project has a number of objectives. The first is to co-create solutions for changes, and that's with the range of people who may be seen as stakeholders, including the people who live in the area, and there is a growing population of residents around this area, the property owners, bringing them into the tent and helping, allowing them to express their needs through this co-creation process, the local municipality, the owner of the road, the county, as well as the shopkeepers. And through this process, we hope to generate ideas for making the places more attractive to spend time in. Part of that, and leading into this, has been to map both the opportunities around the perimeter. It's lying close to the fjord. It is easily accessible to green open areas. As I mentioned, there are areas around that are being developed for residential use, but there are also a number of opportunities, both with the low value buildings and the open car parking areas, all of which contribute to the fact that this is a less than attractive place to walk. The co-creation workshops, as I said, involve property owners and as well as local residents. Another important aspect, and this is perhaps bringing it back to the use of technology, is how the four different participants, the four different members of the consortium, are each using different visualization and co-creation technologies, from virtual reality caves to augmented reality, which is what a technology that we're using here in Trondheim. We hope to engage the stakeholders through those media and evaluate how they're able to enable co-creation through their use. A big and here we see the way in which our proposals or the design opportunities being made available through augmented reality to residents. A big event is the placemaking festival to take place here in June, where we're inviting shopkeepers. It's on a Sunday, shops closed, and other people who are not normally able to attend during the working week for whatever reason to this placemaking festival to enjoy the opportunity to work together. The key deliverables, and here's a representation of our three other partners. We're working with Gdansk and the Gdansk University of Technology, the University Polytechnic University of Valencia, and Oxford Brookes University in these co-creation urban living labs. I just wanted to finish off by talking a little bit about how we're planning for nature. And Norway has a strong connection with nature. It's part of our identity, if you like, to be able to connect with pristine nature. But that attractiveness and the ability, the financial ability of society is actually now changing the very nature of what we're attracted to spend time in. And we're working on a project that is really centered on how can we stop places like this emerging, which are developing through the needs of the local communities to attract economic development, through the need to co-locate around attractions like ski areas, but wasteful of both resources and of nature itself. And so a project, sorry about this. There, a project called Source is looking at how we can use the holiday homes we have more effectively, understand how the opportunities and barriers to a green shift exist in a well-defined area, and work toward breaking those barriers down. Again, we're looking at co-creation with the wide range of stakeholders, including those who are currently drawing economic benefit from business as usual, and turning it around and looking at how new business opportunities might arise through a sharing economy, through a more circular approach to the way places are being developed, through intensification of existing areas and the ability to not expand into areas that have been regulated or tagged for future development. As noted, the cabin culture is deeply embedded in the Norwegian culture, but is almost perversely eating itself. So working with partners in Sweden who have similar circumstances, we're looking to, through co-creation workshops, to tease out the tensions and look for areas of overlap. I guess just to finalize, or to conclude my portion of this, urban settlements represent an important context for achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that's the background to today's discussion. Smart technologies give us the power to understand how those interactions, but can also be limited in scope. It's important to engage with those we're planning for. And in that context, the way in which those technologies can develop information that communicates, but also enables co-creation to occur in different ways than we have been used to in the past, can be useful to consider. Okay, thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Professor Jared. That was really very interesting, particularly how you brought together the existing communities and what they can do to make our lives more sustainable. Particularly, looking at the co-creation workshop and how you effectively were bringing in technology at different levels and different users and their capabilities to sort of interact and come up with the right decisions. Thank you both for your presentation. And so let me open the floor for question and answers. We still have about 30 minutes, so that's a good time. And but having said that, let me open the floor. But let me start with Jorge. Jorge, are you still with us? Jorge Rojas. Jorge, please open your mic and ask your question.
Yes. So thank you for the presentation. I just was wondering, because my question was regarding if the developing countries should also go in the same direction to creating or developing smart cities, considering that we have differences with developed countries. Like, one main problem I can say is that most of the urban areas were developed without a proper planning, right? So people will start taking areas, and there was not a proper planning phase for developing specific areas for developing green, let's say, areas where will be like hospitals or will be area for recreation. So I was wondering how should be the path that developing nations should follow, and if we should go in the direction of having smart cities, or should be like something different that we should try to address.
Who would like to go first?
I can start, and then maybe Morten wants to add to it. It's a very good question, and I think for me it's one of the key issues. Sustainability is sustainable development. The sustainable development goals are quite different depending on where you start from. So if you take developing countries, most developing countries have a need for a lot of new infrastructure. So you mentioned informal settlements. So that's kind of people building their own houses out of found materials, etc. So there's a huge need to develop new infrastructure, new cities. And what I would say is that absolutely no way do we want to follow what's happened in developed countries, because what they've built is unsustainable. That's why we have a major climate change problem. That's why in terms of consumption of resources and waste, they're enormously wasteful infrastructure. So what we need to do is we need to develop an alternative path. And that alternative path needs to not only be far more efficient and environmentally friendly. A lot of the things that Morten mentioned is we need to kind of how this fits in and works with natural systems. But the other side to it is how do we create many of the kind of beneficial aspects? And I think this is where the circular economy is very interesting, because you can create new enterprises, you can create new jobs, and have far more efficient, low waste approaches. And this 15-minute cities also neighborhood is a very good example. Is that you don't need cars for each household. You don't need cars. And so we can develop very alternative models, which leapfrog a lot of the problems that we now see in American cities, many European cities, Australian cities. And I think, but each country, each context, the culture, the environment, the climate, etc., needs to kind of think through how the local systems worked. And that's very much why I talked about this evidence-based approach, where you find a lot of alternative systems and you build very efficient local systems that work very well with local cultures and the local economy. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy. What? Any comments?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation, and one that I'm not as familiar with as Jeremy would be. But I can't help but think that the technologies, in the way they can assess and perhaps be used to communicate different options for going forward, mightn't be a useful thing to consider. I agree with Jeremy that the solutions can't be the same, but it's the technologies would really need to be. I mean, we need to ask the technologies to assess the right problem and hope and be in a position to be able to evaluate the ideas in the context of what they're aimed at.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Let's move on to Jake Johnson. Jake, you have a very interesting question. And when you say AOS cities, I assume you're talking about the age of Sigmar and the city of Sigmar. So go ahead, open your mic and please ask the question. There was a few sessions ago, we had also looked at the city of Wakanda, by the way. Jake, are you with us? Well, Jake is not here, but let me read his question. So he says, what is the biggest limiting factor in today's AOS cities? And how will cultural and regional differences affect smart cities? So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Age of Sigmar and the city of Sigmar. It's a fictional city. It's part of one of the video games world.
I will claim ignorance of that particular, but I am a little bit familiar with culture. and how, well, a little bit familiar in that I've previously worked and lived in New Zealand, which is increasingly multicultural. And it doesn't compare to the different cultures that many of us in the meeting today are familiar with. So apologies, but I wonder if the technologies can become and the use of the technologies can become boundary objects that can help collect an understanding or help in the communication process. I mean, that would be maybe off the top of my head, but we also have to be sure that they're not counter to cultural needs.
Jeremy, let me change that question just a little bit. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the city of Sigma or not, but I'm sure you're familiar with the city of Wakanda from the Black Panther.
Yes.
So maybe in that context, you might want to respond to this question.
I think one of the interesting design problems really with smart cities and built environments generally. So we've got a set of sustainability goals. This is the performance we have to achieve. And inevitably, we have people, built environments, and technology that will then generate impact and the type of performance that we actually get. And so one of the key things that we can do with built environments, and it's slightly controversial because there's always this interest in kind of having cultures and populations having total freedom to do what they want to as a kind of cultural expression. And I think we've reached a stage really where we need to use our built environments very creatively to encourage particular cultures, to encourage particular behaviors that are more sustainable, working patterns that are more sustainable. And that's where the creativity of really good design and really good management, because we can design these 15-minute cities where there's full of activities, there's social interaction, it's fun, it's exciting. And you can then compare that to these sterile environments where there are cars and all of these kind of smart technology. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, why aspire to that type of lifestyle when you can have this one, which is actually far more sustainable and actually far, more interesting. And I think we can use films, we can use culture, we can use, as it evolves. And traditionally, culture has been very strongly around social values, social norms, interaction. And really, I think that's what they should be teaching in architecture schools and urban design schools is how do we create these incredibly attractive environments that, are far better than the alternatives that are pushed through the media and pushed through kind of very commercial, capital developments. And so yeah, I've kind of answered your question in a slightly roundabout way, but I think that's how we can use culture and we can build on a lot of the values that are inherent in many cultures.
True indeed. For those of you who are not familiar with the city of Wakanda, that is a Marvel city, and if you have seen Black Panther, you perhaps have come across the city of Wakanda. And if you'll recall, Professor Kathy Michelle, also from South Africa, had made a very good presentation on that particular city. So just to recap, what we are talking about. But Mike Bishop, you had a similar question as Jake had, also referring to AOS. So do you want to go ahead and ask your question? It'll be a good follow-up.
Professor, looks like he's not here. Maybe you can read it out.
Okay, so Mike is not here. So let me read his question. So he says, how do cities ensure that technology benefits everyone, not just certain groups? And can you give an example of a city that effectively uses smart technology to meet sustainability goals?
Well, I think the question is one that we're really concerned about with our urban living labs, is how the use of technology might exclude certain groups, certain people. And we're taking steps because we're interested in encouraging input to these transformation processes from as wide a range as possible. We are supplementing, we're not relying only on the use of smart technologies in the co-creation process. And we have analog tools and methods as well. So, I guess we're grappling with this, and maybe through this research project that I've referred to earlier, we'll be able to understand where differences are, and maybe then be able to address them.
I think it's a very good question, because in developing countries, technology is associated with a set of kind of fairly major impediments. One is cost. Some technology is very expensive, and the other is the technical capacity to install, maintain, update, sometimes very sophisticated technology. And so inevitably what tends to happen in many cities is that they become the domain of the wealthy, and they can then leverage that to become more wealthy. So I think the solution to that really goes back to some of the ideas I talked about right at the beginning in my talk. And one is that cities and municipalities need to set very clear, defined goals in terms of access to technology. So if a particular technology is very useful, and it almost is part of a kind of quality of life aspect, and clearly things like water, energy, but increasingly information technology, education, health, all of those are associated with technologies. So you use the SDGs to define minimum standards, and that becomes your target. And you've got a target for 2030. That's what you drive. Now, the second part of that is a problem around finance. And that's why I talked about, product as a service models, the sharing economy. So drawing in private finance, alternative arrangements to make that technology, those advantages, really accessible, very cheaply, very low cost, so that it's universal. Everybody can access it. And part of that is an organizational problem. It's not a technology problem. And this is where things like equipment libraries become quite interesting. So, one of the examples that we've explored, and many cities have explored, is the idea that not everybody needs to own washing machines or lawnmowers or power drills. And not all contractors have to have, a full suite of construction equipment. What you can do is you can provide that at a center, at a library, at a hiring depot, and even a very small contractor can access the latest, most efficient technology at a daily cost that's very affordable, and build very sophisticated interiors or buildings. And so what you're doing is you're using new models, you're using different approaches to provide access really to very advanced, sophisticated technologies in a very affordable, sustainable way. And the maintenance of that and the capital of that is then sits with the people most able to provide that, which is, entrepreneurs who can then provide that service. And government's role is to A, drive it, but B, make sure that it is affordable, it's universally accessible.
Great, thank you. Let me ask, as we still have time for a few questions. So any questions from the audience? You can open your mic and ask. Okay, let me ask the next question that has come up on text here, and that's from Rui Zheng. And she says, how can smart technologies be tailored to address the unique sustainability challenges of rapidly urbanizing areas in the global south?
I think this is one for you again, Jeremy.
Yeah. Jeremy? I think Jeremy is frozen. His video is frozen. So, let me Jeremy had to sign off. Okay. So let me ask another question. What are the biggest barriers in integrating digital tools and data systems into city planning, and how might we overcome those barriers? Martin?
Yeah, that is a question we're dealing with even here. Well, yeah, here in Norway. Fortunately, the government is very proactive and supporting the development of or the access to digital technologies for spatial planning, and provides both economic resources and tries to stimulate the acquisition of knowledge around how they can be used, how they can be developed. So I think at government, from a top down, that is being stimulated by both central and regional or municipal governments. In terms of acquiring the skills necessary to operate or to utilize these technologies, I think there's quite a high level of techno savvy understanding in the country, and that's being further developed in universities like ours. So I think I won't say we're leading the world, but there is support at both at grassroots and social level, as well as from authorities to support this. And the evidence is that cities are developing digital twins. Ålesund, for example, has a digital twin being developed right now. We have the digital twin of our city here at Trondheim being contemplated, if not being developed right now. I think we have the economic resources to, that's probably what distinguishes the background and experience that Jeremy has from the one I'm working in a context that is quite well resourced.
Well, we have a few minutes left, so any pressing questions from the audience? I think Jeremy probably wasn't able to join again. Well, so in the interest of time, let me ask my final question. I always get the privilege of asking the last question, and that really relates to what Jeremy, I think, had mentioned, and then you mentioned again in your presentation, Martin, is about how there was during COVID time, there was a huge drop in carbon emission, right? And Jeremy showed a very nice graph that showed 20% reduction and so on. So, but the question that comes to my mind, so his comment at that time, and Jeremy, glad you're back. I was just referring to your slide where you mentioned about a huge drop, about 20% in carbon emissions during COVID. And then you mentioned that, okay, there is a way forward. There is a possibility that we can actually do it. But I wanted to question you that, and both of you actually, that if you put in perspective for what was happening during COVID, so factories were closed, transportation was low, people were not moving around, more things were happening in the house rather than out and about. So particularly construction projects, although in the US it was declared as an essential industry, but still it was lower than normal construction activity. So if construction equipment are the biggest carbon emitters on our construction sites, they were not there. So given that these activities are going to come back, or they did come back, what would be your proposal in terms of what should be the steps forward that we learn from the less usage of these activities and more towards sustainable development?
I think the very first one is just that it's possible. Because so often you talk to a government official, you talk to a big corporate, and they just say, give up, don't bother, we're doomed. And you show that graph and you say, this is what we achieved in 1 month globally. We achieved a 20% reduction. And they can't argue with it. The data's there. That's one of the huge benefits of where we are currently in terms of technology is that we can show the data. And so that's the first thing is you can't argue with the data and show the evidence. Now, the second part to that is what are the threads that enable that and created that change? Some was, overbearing government regulations, etc. Some were kind of very strong economic incentives, economic change, but a huge factor to that also was personal motivation and decisions. And I think what is interesting is that globally, if you look at our working patterns, they've totally changed since COVID. It's perfectly acceptable for most countries to have a policy of working at home. And a lot of these kind of different models. And I think what we need to do is realize that if we are serious about some of the SDGs and are we serious about carbon emission reductions, we need to use the tools that are at hand. And these are the ones which work because they've been shown to work. And so, one of the things that we need to do is we need to get our hands dirty as built environment researchers, as city researchers, and say, here's the data, these are the levers. If you really want to create change, we can show you how. We understand what's happened, but we want to create long-term sustainable patterns, sustainable neighborhoods, sustainable cities. And what we can learn from that, the COVID experience, is that there were many benefits. Obviously there were terrible things that happened, but some of the social aspects, were a huge improvement. People saw their children, the quality of life improved. They walked. A lot of health aspects, other than COVID itself, improved. And that's what we need to learn, is we need to say, let's look at that experiment, draw from that the learning, and bed and identify the key levers, and then with government, with large private sector, with culture, with how people behave and organizational structures, drive the change that will achieve the SDGs in 2030. And avoid the situation where everybody says, let's give up because it's not going to work. We know it can work, but we haven't really addressed it in a very coordinated, concerted way across the different sectors. And I think that's the big lesson with COVID, is that you can create a 20% reduction in the space of a month if you want to.
Right, indeed. Mod, any thoughts?
Yeah, hey, I think we need to, as Jeremy says, we've demonstrated that we can make it happen. I think the circumstances of that making it happen were the stick. We were compelled to live locally. I think now, knowing that we can make it work, we need to make it more attractive to be local, to live local, to walk, and to undertake the activities in the ways that we did during the COVID period. We also know that that technologies, the technologies you referred to, Mark, about regarding the construction sites, for example, there are technologies that enable construction sites to be less emitting, but we do have an industry that is also very mobile, and so getting to the construction sites and working in the way that we have, perhaps is something we need to look at, and some of the efficiencies that can arise from central fabrication that can also have benefits in terms of health, more certainty in where people go to in our industry go to work is something that we should look at. I think, as Jeremy said, we've got the evidence from the COVID period that we put in front of people, put in front of decision makers, and supplement the need, I mean, which the Sustainable Development Goals are addressing, with the attractiveness of work living in different ways now.
And I think both of you mentioned that, Jeremy, you talked about neighborhood sustainability planning efforts that are going on, and Martin, you mentioned about the co-creation workshops that are more at a neighborhood level. So I think that approach seems to be quite effective in terms of how can we change our living habits, work habits, coexistence habits to be more sustainable, where you don't need, you can have walkable cities, for instance, rather than drivable cities. Yeah. And both of you mentioned, touched upon that as well. But with the interest of time, we have just about a minute left. Your final thoughts on, how can we make existing cities more sustainable? So we talked about smart cities, but this is a question, 30 seconds, what can be done for existing cities?
Involve everyone. I think this needs to be a grassroots effort, and we have the tools, as long as we have the incentive to involve people who live in a place to transform. That's I think the it's of the people for the people.
Jeremy?
Thank you. Very good question. I think the key is to go back to neighborhoods. If you're going to live in a neighborhood for 10 plus years, what sort of neighborhood do you want to live in? Are you happy that there's cars driving through at high speed so your children can't play on the street? Are you, so, and I think what I would argue is very similar to what Morton said, but to make sure that in an identified neighborhood, you work with the community in a very structured way. So we could take the Sustainable Development Goals and say, how do we build local capability within this neighborhood to achieve all of the SDGs within the neighborhood? What are the things that we can do? We can look at renewable energy, we can look at centralized waste systems, recycling, we can look at composting, we can look at mixed use so that, there's more local food produced locally, urban agriculture, creating jobs, etc. And really develop a local plan where you draw in local government, you draw in some of the local businesses, you draw in the community, and you build incrementally all the capabilities of a built environment that will enable everybody to live, very high quality, sustainable lives and achieve the SDGs at the same time. Because the SDGs are really the kind of end result. What the mechanics of achieving those you need to build, what are the systems that you need to build, etc. So I think that's probably the most effective way of working with existing cities, is to take it back down to a neighborhood level, and then at a city level, coordinate and build on successful interventions so that you take the kind of full city towards achieving the SDGs over a defined period.
Great, both of you. Thanks very much. And Jeremy, that sort of brings back the system of system approach that you had mentioned earlier in your presentation as well. So thank you both very much. This has been indeed a very thought-provoking and excellent panel discussion. I appreciate both of you taking time in your different parts of the world, different time zones, and so on. So thank you again. So big round of applause to both of you, and I look forward to seeing you here in May for further discussion on this very topic. So thank you all, and goodbye to our audience. We'll meet again next week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.